Hello everyone, Unabridged Gamer here. My nasal passages may be congested, but at least they aren't full of crazed killers. Or so we hope. And on that note of crazed killers and goopy, creepy hallways, happy Halloween, or happy slightly after Halloween, depending on when the video goes up. The Devil in Me has a preview build out, so let's take a look and see how it plays, and what clues we can find. And since it seems to be pretty close to the final game content, they'll probably get around to replacing the Man of Medan art at some point, we can assume all the clues that we turn up over the course of the demo are vitally important to unlocking the secret, a Grantham Dume. So let's dig in. It starts with a few clips introducing the game's premise. Some of the footage has already been publicly shown as part of the preview presentation, but one factoid proves shockingly intriguing. According to Charlie, Dume didn't mention how he knew Architects of Murder was doing an episode about Holmes. So how did he know to contact them? We're also introduced to a new character during the montage, this bald guy who operates the ferry to the island, as well as checking them into the hotel. I can't imagine they'd be so obvious about presenting Dume, especially when the killer shows up later in the demo wearing a mask. So is this an actor who's been hired to pretend that he's Dume? An accomplice? The playable portion of the demo opens in the chapter Cigarettes, in which Charlie and Aaron go searching for just that. The demo is only a single player experience, so it's not clear who player 2 will be controlling in this scene. Player 1 is Charlie. Will player 2 be Aaron, or is this a Salim's intro situation in which one player will handle the cigarette search while the other controls Kate and Mark as they go looking for the perfect shot? Let's take a moment to note that the presumed death counter is currently set to 178. That will no doubt be important later. Right away, the game starts layering on the ominous foreshadowing. Here's a letter from Dume to one Joseph Morello, inviting him and 4 close associates of his choosing to a sneak peek at the Holmes Island tourist experience. Morello responds that he's going to be bringing along his wife, brother, and 2 daughters. This feels like it's going to lead somewhere bleak, doesn't it? Especially when we find that this sign-in book confirms that the Morello family did, in fact, turn up for their appointment a week before the game is set. Can we pause for a second to marvel at Francis's awful handwriting? Seriously, what's going on there? More importantly, this page suggests that Dume murdered 2 children the week before, and while that's not untrodden territory for this series, after all, the entire plot of Little Hope revolves around a child burning to death, this is a torture hotel in which people are violently murdered as part of elaborate artistic set pieces, and imagining children going through that is gonna be rough. We've also got evidence of 2 other victims turning up in the weeks leading up to the game, and if the pattern holds, that's already 15 bodies we know about. Maybe that 178 dead bodies registered on the counter aren't so implausible anymore. Also, since the victims obviously aren't signing out, we've got a sample of the killer's handwriting. Will that be important later on? The lengths the killer goes to in order to keep from leaving fingerprints anywhere suggests he's very interested in keeping his identity a secret, so having something identifiable might actually be useful later. I wonder why the killer is so adamant that people come in groups of 5. We're told that the experience is designed for 5 people. What does that actually mean? We've already seen a choose between the 2 sequence in the game. Is that just an introduction to the kind of winnowing down sequences we'll be seeing over the rest of the story? Also worth noting, the first reference we got to The Devil in Me was in Fliss's hallucination in Man of Medan, which referred to a ceremony designed to summon the devil which required 3 women and 2 men. Interestingly, in the guest book, we see 4 sets of names, the main characters, and 3 others. 3 sets have the exact same gender breakdown, as mentioned in the Devil's book from Man of Medan. If it was all 4, I would say it was somehow meaningful, but it's at least extremely interesting a coincidence. It makes me wonder if there's some deeper significance to this gender mix that's going to reveal itself later on. As for the 4th group, it was 4 men and 1 woman. Also worth noting, in the first list of 3 names, there's a Brad and Rachel recalling Medan and Ashes, but more importantly, there's a cute reference to Until Dawn. The name Jackie Fiddles is a gender-swapped and slightly altered version of Jack Fiddler, which is the real name of the stranger, better known as Flamethrower Guy. Nice to see an Until Dawn reference so early in the game, although let's keep an eye out for a dropped flashlight with a cracked lens. Then we get our first super weird clue. This postcard from the general manager of a retirement home to the son of one of the new residents. We'll soon discover that the man in question is FBI Special Agent Hector Monday, and he's arranged to have his mother move to Twilight Prairie, a retirement or care home. There's no sign of where that is, the postcard lacks a stamp or postmark, but we do learn that Monday lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is just north of Washington, D.C. Why is a 30-year-old piece of personal correspondence from halfway across the country sitting in this drawer? No clear ideas yet, but anomaly theory suggests that it must be vitally important. Is Twilight Prairie in Michigan or Illinois? Also, it's neat that they left the comments page completely blank in both examples. After all, you're supposed to leave comments about your hotel experience when you check out, and of course, none of these people actually did. I'm not saying that the deaths are going to be super disgusting, but Dumais is clearly scheduling his murders a week apart from one another so that he can clean up the intense amount of blood. Then it's off to the bar where we meet our first creepy animatronic. This one supposedly has the ability to recognize voices, as when Charlie asks it for a pack of cigarettes, it points over to the machine in the corner of the room. Of course, we quickly learn that it's got a camera in its eye, and is streaming a feed of the room to the killer, who's likely right behind one of the secret wall panels. More on that in a moment. This newspaper gives us some confirmation about just who Manny Sherman is, and what exactly he did that got him executed back in 2003. While the details of the crimes can wait until we hear his confession tapes over the course of the game, the fact that he was called the Alabama Beast certainly suggests a brutality to his crimes that I'm sure the game is going to enjoy exploiting. Given how long it's been since the teaser, it's nice to have Manny's identity as the corpse from the teaser and collector's edition be confirmed at long last. Also, we learned that Hector Monday, the guy with the mother in the retirement home, is the FBI agent that captured Sherman. So that's 2 references to that character, twice as many nods as we've had to Manny Sherman so far. Now we get some near cheating from the developers in this delightfully tense sequence of the killer creeping up on Charlie as he tries to force a pack of cigarettes out of the machine. As we can see based on the position of the various characters in the room, we're asked to believe that the killer must have ducked back through a secret door in this wall and closed it, completely silently, all within the 4 seconds between this shot of him creeping up on Charlie and Aaron calling from the doorway. We can assume that from Aaron's point of view, the killer and the door weren't visible. Unless he's a ghost or has an invisibility suit, this seems like a bit of a stretch. Then it's over to Mark and Kate, who spent a few minutes searching for a way to get up to the balcony to set up a shot. I checked the time code on this, and it's happening at the exact same time as the Charlie and Aaron scene, which makes sense that they end at the same basic moment. This suggests that while Aaron is wandering around the hallways, Jamie will be dealing with a power failure. What does this mean in practice? For the early game at least, the 2-player game will likely be half as long as the single-player version, since large chunks of gameplay will be happening simultaneously. Co-op was always shorter than the single-player version. I just hope that they still have exclusive single-player scenes set aside for the curator's cut, like the Salim intro from House of Ashes, so that players have a markedly different experience when going back for a second time for the solo game. Mark and Kate catch a glimpse of the killer walking around the courtyard, which makes this a perfect time to be super petty. This scene is set at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 26th, 2022, in the rough environs of Chicago, Illinois. When did the sun set on the day in that area? 5:53. So yeah, this scene should be in near total darkness. Also, check out this clock that offers a mini jump scare. The time is set to 8:45, so it's both the wrong time and shouldn't be ringing since it's not on the hour. Mysterious. Also, and I'm not saying the contractors deserve to be murdered by Dumais, but it feels like if they'd been competent at all, they would have filled in the gaps around this window. Here's a book written by Joseph Morello. It turns out that he's an expert on Holmes, having written at least one book about the killer. So between his book and the Architects of Murder documentary, the killer is going out of his way to target experts on Holmes for execution, which raises 2 questions. 1, why? 2, what were the connections between the other 2 groups of victims that arrived before the Morellos and Holmes? While searching the office, Mark can find a scrapbook, which is also connected to FBI agent Hector Monday. It's his birth notice, which is super weird to turn up in Dumais' office. Or is it? After all, this scrapbook is something that Monday's mother would have likely had with her in her retirement home, which we've already seen a reference to. Also, we learn that Hector's middle name is Waylon, making his initials HWM. More on that later, although you can probably guess where this is going. Another weird thing, there are 2 other birth notices sharing the page with Hector's, Marilyn Hall and Maurice Wright. This might not mean anything, but 3 of the victims listed on the first page in the sign-in book all share the name Hall: Thomas, Cecil, and Kurt. Perhaps that means something. While exploring further, Mark turns up an audio tape, one of the recordings that Hector Monday made of his interviews with Manny Sherman. It outlines the beginning of Manny's fascination with Holmes, although whether that's actually influenced his crimes is, at this point, still up in the air. Then we get a look at this display, which purports to feature jewelry from one of Holmes' victims. Does this tie back to the game's teaser, which based on previously released footage, seems to be about people getting murdered by Holmes back in the 19th century, that would be a nice link. During the dinner scene, it's mostly the characters talking to each other, so we don't get a chance to get any info about the plot, but Jamie does mention that she saw the man they think is Dumais and some girl leaving on a ferry while they were getting sailed into their rooms. Is this the actor and support personnel getting sent home before the murders get started? And if so, do they know what they're involved in? Have these same workers been welcoming people to their desks for the past month? Or is it a new set of workers each week? Worth noting that after dinner, the counter is set to 180. If that means 2 more victims have been added, does that mean those 2 workers never made it back to the mainland? Speaking of the dinner scene, am I the only one absolutely dumbfounded by how much Charlie looks like John Hamm here? When he's talking and moving around, you don't see it, but wow, whenever he's still and just looking at people, it's John Hamm. Here's a super cute glitch. The wine still thinks that the glass is being held at an angle, or there was some quick hardening jello in there. Now that's a terrifying invention if there ever was one. This sequence of the killer setting up a diorama of the meal is just creepy, especially the use of Charlie's spare hat and likely glasses to perfect the look. Did Dumais also steal his cigarettes while helping with the luggage earlier? Probably. It also raises a question, why make a diorama out of this scene when all the other dioramas we've seen have been of people's deaths? Unless this is a death as well. Did he poison their wine just to make absolutely sure that even if they escape the gauntlet of traps, no one makes it out alive, and unless the player finds an antidote for everyone, we'll end up with a nasty Julia and Man of Medan style surprise death. That's probably a stretch, and I could see people being super upset by that kind of ending, but this is the same company that had a number of people die of thirst on a drifting boat endings for Medan, so I wouldn't put it past them to do something so unexpectedly cruel just as we thought the game was over. After dinner, we get the Erin scene, where she allows herself to be led around the hotel hallways by mysterious audio clips that the killer plays from speakers in the walls. We also get a little check-in with the plight of the Morello family here. The wife was understandably not pleased about the whole bringing the children to a murder tourism hotel thing, and on that point, I'm going to agree wholeheartedly with her. Don't bring kids to a recreation of a slaughterhouse. Nothing good can come of this. The best case is therapy. There's also plenty of screams of agony, although it's not entirely clear who is doing the screaming just yet. I can't say enough good things about just how well constructed this sequence is. The game tricks the player into being so focused on following the audio cues that they won't even notice that the walls have closed behind them. Here's a painting of Holmes' death. Note that it's situated in a dead end. But once Erin has been run around by a few other audio clips, she'll wind up back at the painting and a new hallway has opened up. Just a great scene overall. Too bad there's no subtitling for the screams and conversations though. Then it's over to Jamie, who goes looking around for a way to turn the power back on in the hotel and comes across a few fascinating clues. First off is this letter announcing a change to the wills of Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, leaving all of their money and property to Richard Belknap in the event of their deaths. Interestingly, their address is listed as East 3rd Lighthouse in Lake Michigan. It's not a stretch to guess that the lighthouse in question is probably this one, visible in a premonition that features both Charlie and Erin. So this likely solves the mystery of how the killer took possession of the island. He got himself named as the owner's heir, and then murdered them. Whether that was by fraud or forgery, we don't know, but the actual Holmes spent most of his life as a con man pulling these types of schemes, so it's completely natural to see Dumais following his inspiration's footsteps. So is Richard Belknap Dumais' real name, or is it just another alias? Or is he a separate person entirely? Probably not the last one given some of the other pieces of info that come to light in this chapter. Also, at the bottom of the letter, there's a bit of a typo where it says that Jessica Maxwell signed over the name K. Schroeder, but that's actually referring to another document that shows up a little later. Here's a letter demonstrating that Belknap, or Dumais, paid $24,000 for a hat worn by Holmes, presumably this one from the balcony jump scare. And yes, it's cute that the killer's username is HHH1896, Holmes' initials, and year of death. Next up, we have a cost estimate for the renovations of the hotel on the island, adding remote-controlled moving walls and floors, and then completely revamping the pipework in the basement. We've seen the moving walls and floors already. Could the pipework be related to the crematorium and suffocation chambers? Maybe there's also a drowning room somewhere down there. The hotel used to have a spa, after all. This cost assessment comes from the Kelly Schroeder who was accidentally mentioned in the previous letter, and establishes the start of the latest renovation on the hotel as January 2017. There's a 6-year gap between the will being changed in 2011 and construction starting on the hotel, so apparently this took a lot of planning. although we still don't know exactly when the original owners of the hotel died, so that's gonna be fuzzy for a while. The next letter details the contractor's plans to have a skeleton crew go and put together an estimate for how much it will cost to renovate the spa underneath the hotel. Of course, we know this renovation never happens, and based on the mannequins we saw in the Gamescom demo, it's safe to say that the skeleton crew were the first victims of Dumay's murder hotel. Worth noting, of course, that the killer is going by Belknap in all this correspondence. When did he make the switch to a new alias? Or is there another killer involved? Also, flipping over the page reveals that there were 5 members of the skeleton crew, fitting the killer's murder script exactly, but this time it was 3 men and 2 women, so that's another strike against the importance of gender breakdown to the killer's schemes. In this letter, we discover that yes, the killer did totally murder the skeleton crew and then made it look like they had been lost in the lake through some kind of boating accident. He also invited people from the contracting company to come out for the grand opening, which was set to occur on November 17th, 2017. It's almost 5 years before the game is set, and while 5 years is enough time to rack up 178 murders that are hinted by the death counter, it does seem like a preposterously large number of people to kill without anyone making a connection to the hotel. Say, for example, that the contractors who came for the grand opening got murdered. We don't know for sure that that happened yet, but let's say that they did. Feels like they would throw up some red flags and encourage an investigation given that 5 people had already died on the island. And yes, you can make the argument that the killer would have instructed people to not say where they were going, but how many people would actually go through with that? After all, it's not like Dumay would have any way of knowing whether or not they told anybody. Hopefully we'll get some clarity on this a little further in. Once Erin turns the power back on, she has a run-in with some creepy barbershop quartet animatronics, then gets to listen to the second part of Manny Sherman's confession to Agent Monday, in which she outlines his brilliant plan to get away with murders. Lure real estate agents out to abandoned buildings by the airport, and then kill them with planes flying overhead so that no one would hear the screams. I mean, I guess that would work once, but I don't see how he could have done this over and over again. Serial killers generally get away with it for a while by killing people on the margins of society whose disappearance, or yes, even deaths, the police wouldn't bother investigating. Once more than one middle-class professional white lady turned up butchered and someone made the obvious connection that they'd both been lured to the middle of nowhere by a new client, the cops would have been on to him. At least the fictional version of Holmes that the game's going with killed people from out of town, so there was no obvious way to trace them to him. We also get a brief FBI memo with a special agent describing picking up Hector Monday at the airport. He arrived in Chicago to work on a case, but which one? Now it's time for the possible death scene, where Erin has to decide whether to get killed or just threatened by Dumay. I know which one I'd pick. To the game's credit, they give the player ample choice to not get killed here. The choice is either take the inhaler, in which case Dumay threatens Erin with a knife and cuts off a bit of her hair for a serial killer trophy thing, or try to stab Dumay, which leads to him killing Erin. But the player has to try to stab Dumay twice to make that happen. He effortlessly bats Erin's attack aside the first time, so any player not actively trying to get Erin killed should be able to see that pressing the attack is a bad idea. Despite the fact that Erin can die in this scene, I was unable to find the curator hanging around. Hopefully this is me just not catching a glimpse of him, as the last time I wasn't able to find the curator when people got killed, the result was little hope, and no one wants Devil and Me to turn out to be an April Fool's Day type situation, now do they? This scene also allows us to get a pretty firm answer on whether that's a death counter in the lobby. If Erin survives her encounter with Dumay, the number is 180. If she dies, it's 181. Now we get the guy getting threatened by a scythe scene. Here's the thing, I'm still not sure that this guy in the hood is real. My reasoning is, we've been told that this is an experience designed for 5 people, and this one in particular seems to be built around at least one person being asked to withstand the threat of a knife assault or risk causing someone's death by stepping off the pressure plate. Here's the thing though, Dumay didn't make any attempt to pull one of the living characters into the scene to turn them into a person in the chair. So unless this is a situation where Dumay keeps one person alive from the previous group to act as the person in the chair for the next group, there's a decent chance that this is an animatronic with a speaker under the hood. We've already seen dummies with camera eyes and speakers being used to replay people's dying screams. It's not like this would be hard to recreate. It's notable that despite the fact that they're all in the room together, the man in the hood does not respond to Charlie and Jamie's questions, suggesting that his voice is just a recording, and it's also weird that while his torso, arms, and head jerk around, his legs remain completely immobile. Every one of the animatronics that we've seen so far have been waist up only, so this could easily be one of those. Then Dumay shuts off the lights after the chair victim is killed, and drags the body away so that no one has a chance to get a closer look at it. Does that mean this is definitely not a person? Of course not. The game could even be setting up a bleak ending where a sole survivor winds up becoming the person in the chair for the next set of victims. But it's possible that this is just another part of the game meant to screw with players' heads before the real fun starts. And the demo ends here, which makes this a perfect place to drop some crazy theorizing. Of course, it's a little early to be making bold predictions, but with the game just over 2 weeks away, why not offer some observations and see how we do? Okay, so let's talk about Special Agent Hector Monday, a character we've heard nothing about before this demo, who's referenced 6 different times. Postcard, clipping about his birth, the newspaper about him catching Manny Sherman, 2 interviews with Sherman, and a memo about his arrival in Chicago to hunt another serial killer. That's a ton of information to be dropped about one guy, including a huge amount of personal background information. Enough that we can say that developers think it's important that the player really has a good idea who this guy is. Which brings us to the obvious question. Is Dumais really Hector Monday? There's a long tradition of storytelling pointing in this direction. Countless serial killer tales revolve around the famous Nietzsche quote about being careful not to become a monster when fighting monsters. These stories generally involve having a profiler go so deep into the mind of the killer that they can't find their way back and start killing themselves, which would work as a fine premise here, and there's already some hints pointing in that direction. The teaser showed that the killer had built a recreation of the scene in which Monday interrogated Sherman and even placed his actual corpse there, suggesting that vignette was incredibly important to him for one reason or another. While other vignettes recreate whole scenes, the Sherman interrogation vignette is notably missing the other person who would have been in that room. Instead of a mannequin representing Hector Monday, we have the killer acting as a stand-in. Is that because he didn't see a need to recreate himself as a replica? All of Sherman's tapes talk about his being influenced by the idea of H.H. Holmes, and we get the recurring idea that it's impossible to understand the motives of serial killers unless you actually kill people yourself. With Monday being an FBI agent tasked with hunting serial killers, is it possible that he was driven by frustration with his inability to catch a killer? They went to drastic lengths and actually killed someone for the insight it would offer him? And maybe he wound up liking the killing way too much and made a career change? Did he steal an island and come up with a series of perfect murders, avoiding leaving any trail of evidence using the expertise in crime gleaned from years in the FBI? Also curious is the fact that in none of the Manny Sherman videos does Hector Monday ever speak, having his interjections and questions be edited out. And if so, why? Is it because players would recognize Hector's voice if they heard it? Game director Tom Heaton name-checked Psycho when talking about influences on the story. Is this person in the wheelchair the preserved corpse of Hector's mother? And is it a coincidence that Hector's initials are HWM, exactly the same as Holmes' real name, Herman Webster Mudgett? Based on the existing evidence, this could absolutely be where they're going, but there's some other directions they could turn in as well. It's possible that all this evidence has been left to frame Special Agent Monday by the real killer so that they can escape into anonymity after completing whatever they considered their great work to be, which would explain why they're being so careful about never leaving fingerprints or showing their face. Let's circle back to the question exactly of how Dumais knew that Architects of Murder was doing an episode on Holmes and would therefore be easy to lure to their deaths. There seems to be 2 big possibilities. 1, Joseph Morello is a published expert on Holmes, so it's entirely possible that the show interviewed him for the documentary and he mentioned it to the killer. 2, if Hector is in fact Dumais, then perhaps they interviewed him while doing an episode about Manny Sherman or whoever he was chasing in Chicago, and this Holmes episode came up in conversation. Before we go, let's take a quick look at the curator's brief appearance in the game. No, not in the Blackout chapter, as I've already said, I failed to spot him there. In point of fact, the demo actually has a curator scene where he can comment on Erin's death if her encounter with Dumais happens to go that way. And in that scene, we get 2 choice pieces of information about the curator. 1, he's no longer coy about the fact that he can turn into a bird whenever he wants, showing off the ability almost recklessly just to get down from a balcony. The Hunin and Munin vibes intensify. 2, the disillusionment with his job is growing more pronounced. He outright says that he almost envies the player for being able to alter stories, not just record them. Has his frustration with being trapped in the role of a watcher driven him to more drastic action? Is the reason I couldn't find him in the dark room scene because he was right there the whole time murdering Erin? Probably not, but imagine how cool that would be. And finally, it looks like Supermassive have brought back the special narrative feature that was dropped in House of Ashes. Medan had a comic book showing what happened on the titular ship. Little Hope had a comic functioning as the imaginary diary of a man that doesn't exist, and I guess a nightmare Anthony's having about therapy. In addition to the dioramas that players will unlock by finding opals, I found 1 in my entire playthrough, and the dioramas cost 10 each, so expect these to be tough to unlock. We also have something called Murder with Morello. Will it be a comic book about his family's ordeal in the castle? Episodes of a Quarry-style true crime podcast? Hopefully we'll find out soon. Wait, did I say finally? Quick, let's take a look at the premonitions we found. 1, here's Charlie and Erin climbing down near this lighthouse. 2. This is Charlie trying to escape being burned alive and failing. I guess reaching through the hole in the door is a bad idea. 3. Here's Aaron getting stabbed. This is the death you can see in the demo. And now Charlie gets murdered by a hook to the chest while lying on a metal table. Okay, we're done. For real this time. All in all, a fascinating preview, and it has me eagerly awaiting the game on November 18th. For more Dark Pictures content, be sure to subscribe here, and for more gaming strangeness, check out Unabridged Gamer.